Hello, friends. Welcome to this third Bible study in this series that we are doing through the Gospel according to Mark. Previously, we had seen Jesus' authority as a teacher. Then we saw Jesus' authority in terms of healing and how that led to a lot of people following Jesus, or rather, at least seeking him out, coming to him, asking for healing. And that's what we saw in his healing a leper. And we looked at how lepers were treated at the point of time. Now, in this third study that we are going to do, we are going to see another healing. But as we are exploring this person of Jesus, we'll see something more about him. And maybe some of the questions that had come in the previous studies, we may find a perspective on those as well. So without further ado, let us start. So that's our text for today, Mark chapter 2, verses 1 to 12. And right at the beginning, as always, we'll begin with observation. So we see time right at the beginning, a few days later. So we see the connection from what was happening earlier when Jesus again entered Capernaum. Remember, in the first study, we had seen Jesus entered Capernaum and went to a synagogue. Then the news about him spread across Galilee, and we saw him in that region of Galilee. And then again, now he's coming back to Capernaum. Characters: Jesus, the people who heard about him, and he had come home, another place. Now, they gathered in such large numbers that there was no room left, not even outside the door. Now, that's a description of the scene. And that gives us an understanding how much Jesus' name has spread, that people are now gathered in such numbers that there's no room left. Remember earlier in the previous study, we had looked at a leper coming to him. Now, because of that leper going and telling others, we saw the effect it had. He could not, or rather Jesus, could not enter into cities so openly. Because why? Because of this reason. Like, he would always be like mobbed, kind of. And that's what we see over here. There's so many people who are listening to him that there's not much space. So it's like packed. And in that context, we understand that by now, Jesus was quite, well known, and people actually sought him out. So people were coming to him either for healing or for listening or to listen to his great teaching. People were now seeking him out. And then as we continue, we find some more men. Like, so there are people and then some men came. So new characters we see, and they brought a paralyzed man. So some men came bringing a paralyzed man. Now, amongst them, 4 of them were carrying that person. Now, as we continue, since they could not get him, that paralyzed man, to Jesus because of the crowd, as we read earlier, there was no room left. Not even outside the door. So if you can imagine, you can see that inside the room, it was packed, and even outside there was a crowd. So that was the scene around Jesus at that point of time. So what did they do? They made an opening in the roof. Now we have to keep in mind that the roof, or in houses that time, the roofs would not be pakka, or they would not be like made of concrete, or they would not be made up of any of these modern materials that we may use. They would have been semi-permanent, which could be ripped apart or things like that. And that's what was happening. But then just think of it. These people are doing that to someone else's house. It kind of tells us something about these people, that these people seem to be quite desperate about getting this paralyzed man down to Jesus. So they ripped apart that, so they made an opening in the roof, and then they lowered the man on a mat. Now, when Jesus saw their faith, now interesting, see what they're doing. They brought this person, they saw a crowd, they did not stop, they went up to the roof, opened it, and then lowered the man. Now, all of this Jesus saw, and and it says, Jesus saw their faith. And then he says to the man, son, your sins are forgiven. Now, please stop over here and let's see what happened over here. So these people, they brought the paralyzed man. It seems like they seem to have faith in Jesus. They seem to understand that this man needs to be brought to Jesus who can help him, and he is willing to help. Remember, when it came to that leper, he asked, if you are willing, you can help me. And Jesus says, I am willing. By now, I think these people understand that Jesus can help and he is willing to help. And these people have brought this paralyzed man, maybe their friend, with that faith. And what we see happening through their actions of not waiting outside, taking the initiative to go to the roof, then opening it up and lowering the man down, we basically see their faith, which is now visible in action. So we see their faith in action. But very interestingly over here, so here's a man who most probably has come for healing. Imagine going to the doctor and you tell the doctor, doctor, I have a headache. But then the doctor gives you, or rather asks you to go and get your hand x-rayed. It would seem quite weird, right? So here is a person who's paralyzed, but Jesus is now talking about sins. He says, your sins are forgiven. So now that's again something very interesting. But again, in the context of Jesus' society, a lot of times, and it was true even with leprosy, people or the society looked at afflictions or disease as a consequence of someone's sin. And over here also we find that Jesus seems to give more priority or weightage to the need for forgiveness of sins, like even before his need for healing. Now, I'll just mention that, and I think we need to study more and reflect more to really grab that. So, but for now, I would just like to point that out, that when you look at this, Jesus does not say that you're healed, but rather he's saying, son, your sins are forgiven. And remember, in the previous study also, we had mentioned that Jesus doesn't want himself to be just seen as this great healer. There's something more to him. And we see that over here also. He does not talk about healing, but then he is now talking about sins. And in context of that society, it would have made much more sense, because when they looked at someone's affliction, someone was sick or someone who was maybe paralyzed or having leprosy, they would immediately connect it with sin. So it may seem weird to us, but for them, in that context, it was very much normal. Going further, now some teachers of the law, now some more characters. So the teachers of the law, now what they say, in fact, they don't say, yes, so they don't say, that's important. They're thinking to themselves. And what do they think among them? They cannot think among them, but then maybe individually they're thinking, but then kind of as a group, I guess that's their reaction. Because it's a group, so it says some, not one. So some. So their thought is something like, he's blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone? Now that's an important question they ask among themselves. Because again, going back to their context, like no one can forgive. Like, because remember, this person is paralyzed. It's not as if he has stolen something from somewhere. And so the person from whom he has stolen something, he could have forgiven, but it's something beyond that. So he is paralyzed, and now he's suffering the consequences of his sins. So if someone can forgive, it's God alone. But here now Jesus is saying your sins are forgiven. So how can Jesus say that? That's only God's prerogative to forgive. Now, very interestingly, immediately, now that's a time word, immediately Jesus knew in his spirit what the teachers of the law were not saying, but were thinking. Now that's very interesting. Now, again, if we are reading as Mark's original audience, it would have made us stop, right? Now, many of us, as we know who Jesus is, it seems normal. Yes, Jesus is God, He is all-knowing, and He's all-powerful. Nothing weird about that. But then, imagine a mass original audience reading it, or someone who's not aware of Jesus reading it. It would immediately make you stop and think, okay, so Jesus can understand what other people are thinking. So that's okay. That's also something that Jesus can do. So now that's what Jesus knew immediately what they were thinking, and He responded to them. He says, why are you thinking these things? And He gives them a question. Which is easier to say to this paralyzed man? Your sins are forgiven? Or to say, get up and take your mat and walk? Now just think of it. Which is easier? Now many of us, when we think of the philosophical aspect of this question, will say, your sins are forgiven is far more difficult to say. But then, think about it. It's far more easier to say. And that's what I would rather say. Because your sins are forgiven, that's a intangible statement. As in, I can say your sins are forgiven, but then that need not be visible in effect. But then if I say, get up, take your mat and walk, and if that does not happen, then it means that whatever I said did not happen. You cannot prove whether my sins are forgiven or not forgiven. There's no way of proving whether that happened or not. But if I say, get up, take your mat and walk, if that does not happen, then that did not happen. So in that way, in fact, the second statement, get up, take your mat and walk, is a much more difficult statement to say. So the easiest statement to say is your sins are forgiven, because that does not need to be proved or cannot be easily proved. Who will check? It's beyond human ability to check. But it's very much visible, whether the person is healed or not. If he is healed, he can walk. So that's the logic behind this question, which is easier to say. So definitely it's easier to say your sins are forgiven, but then that's the next word. But Jesus wants these teachers of the law to know that the Son of Man, now He introduces this statement, Son of Man, about which maybe we'll talk a bit later, has authority on earth to forgive sins. So now Jesus is now starting to talk about Himself, that till now you have seen me as someone who can heal, but then I'm now telling you that I, that is the Son of Man, has authority on earth to forgive sins. But I want you to know, so He continues, I tell you, get up, take your mat and go home. So now what basically Jesus is saying is that I have the authority to forgive sins, but here you guys are doubting amongst yourselves. So now I say, get up, take your mat and go home. And now he got up, he took his mat and walked out in full view of them. Now, so what does that imply? It basically implies that Jesus has the authority not only to heal, and just as He has the authority to heal, He also has the authority to forgive sins. Because He proved it by His authority. And now, as we have already seen in the book of Mark, this word authority comes again and again. And in these series of studies, we are kind of seeing the authority Jesus has. He has authority when it comes to teaching. He has authority over demons. He has authority over illnesses, sicknesses. He has authority over thoughts of other people. And now He's saying He has authority to even forgive sins. And that's amazing. We're just, if you just notice, we are kind of exploring this person of Jesus and increasing our understanding of it as we go through this book of Mark. Now, so Jesus has the authority to forgive. But remember what the teachers of the law said, but only God can forgive sins. So that if we connect those two, so what basically Mark is pointing out or helping us to understand or see is that, in fact, it makes us question ourselves, or rather Mark will make us question ourselves. So the teachers of the law have said that only God can forgive sins. Now, here Jesus takes upon the challenge and in fact proves that he has the authority to forgive sins. And if we add 1 plus 1, it kind of implies that Jesus is God, or Jesus has that same authority. Now, that's one thought again I would give over here, and let us continue our series of studies through Mark and explore more. Now, the reason I'm telling you that is we are studying from the perspective of someone who would be reading Mark. In fact, Mark's original audience, when they were reading, like how they would take that ahead. Now, coming back to this term, Son of Man. Now, that's a term we see or we find in Daniel, where someone, it says, that statement says, someone like a son of man. So Daniel sees a vision where he sees someone like the Son of Man is given authority. And you can see that. Therefore, in fact, on your left, the text is given, but those are just excerpts. So therefore, before me was someone like a son of man, was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He was given authority, and that all nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. Again, the word worship, authority and the word worship. And then again, connect this with what happened in this text. And I think that adds extra weightage to what we are seeing happening over here. That here is Jesus who seems to have authority not only to teach, not only to heal, but now he has authority to even forgive sins. Now that's a big thing, because the teachers of the Lord already have stated that only God can forgive sins. And that kind of broadens our understanding of who this person, Jesus, is. And now, if we have been reading other books of the Bible, that helps us to connect and see Jesus as the second person in the Trinity. And that's a very important point from here itself. We can get a picture of Jesus' divinity from here itself, very early in the book of Mark. Now, that's the understanding part of this text. Now, the question over here for us to reflect would be how to connect this with our day-to-day life. Now, there's definitely this one question that comes. We have to reflect upon this identity of Christ. That if Jesus has the authority to forgive, then what am I doing with my sins? This person had a need to be forgiven. Do you and I have needs or reasons to be forgiven? The Bible tells that we all need to be forgiven because we all have sinned. Not even one person can say that, no, I have never sinned. If we have done even a little thing wrong, we have sinned. And I think that is something that unites us all as humans. We all have the need to be forgiven. And here is someone who has the authority to forgive. So what will we do? That's one. Another way of reflecting on this passage will also be by reflecting upon the different characters. Who are we like? Are we like Jesus, who has the authority or the skill or the talent to help people around us? If we are like that, then it is important that we utilize our skill, talent, or authorities to help others. Or maybe we are not like Jesus. Maybe we do not have that authority or that much skill or talent. But are we available like the other people, the friends of the paralyzed person? Maybe there are other people who have that authority or the skill or the talents, but maybe we can be those people who can connect the needy or the people who need help around us. All kinds of help, spiritual help, emotional help, maybe simple things like if you're a student, there can be other students who are struggling. How can we help them? That's the authority, that's the attitude those men had who wanted to help. And that's what they did. They helped. They brought the man to someone who could help. That's another way of reflecting upon it. But then that brings us to another person here, the paralyzed man. In this entire thing, what did he do? He did nothing, right? He could not walk. He could not climb up to the roof. He may not have been able to rip open the roof and then come down. But he did something very important. He may have requested, we do not know those things. He may have been the one to request his friends to take him to Jesus. We do not know that. But definitely we see one thing, that he submitted himself. He surrendered himself to what these other friends of his were doing. And maybe that's again another important thing. He knew that he needed help, and he had friends who were willing to help him. But many a times, we know that we need help, and we know that there are ways through which we can be helped. But then, deep within us, there is that attitude to reject help. That no, I don't need help. I'll not take this thing. Many a times we reject such opportunities that can help us. But here is this paralyzed man who does one thing. He allows himself to be helped. And many a times we as people do not allow ourselves to be helped. And that's again the beautiful thing in this passage, that here we have Jesus who can help, who has the authority to help, and he is already willing to help. But can we open our hearts and allow him to help us? And not be closed in our thinking, which points or brings us to the teachers of the law. I think here we don't see much negativity. In fact, we should give a benefit of doubt to the teachers of the law for now, because that's a genuine question anyone would ask, anyone who's theologically educated, as the teachers of the law were, that wait a minute, he just said your sins are forgiven, but only God can do that. How is he doing that? That's wrong. Means, like, if he gives them the benefit of doubt, I think that's what would happen. But then if we keep encountering, or rather we will encounter teachers of the law, and if we keeping them in mind, we find that they not only have questions, but they're actually quite closed to see what Jesus is actually doing, unfortunately. And that's how they miss out on who Jesus actually is. So sometimes maybe that's who we are, or who we end up being as well. That's another area to think about as well. So that's Mark chapter 2, verses 1 to 12, our third study. And I believe now we can see how Jesus, in the second study that we did not just want himself to be typecast as a healer, because there's something more to him. He's just not a healer, but then there's so much more to him, and we will continue to explore more about him in the coming studies as well. So thank you, and once again, please feel free to share your thoughts and reflections. These studies are not just, these need not be just my thoughts, but we would be very willing and happy to hear your thoughts and your reflections and your lessons and what your applications on this passage. So feel free to open the Bible and go through this passage and reflect and share your thoughts and comments. And if you like it, please share and subscribe for more as well. And above all, please keep remembering us in your prayers so that we can come up with more useful and helpful content. Thank you.